We're here tonight to discuss what makes a literary city. It's a question that I think about every day. Dallas is a city of readers, sometimes even old-fashioned print books. And wow, do we have book clubs here in Dallas. It's even unfashionable to belong to just one or two. You need to belong to 3, 4, or 5. When we founded Interrobang nearly 2 years ago, we believed that there was a place for a store like ours in Dallas. A comfortable, bright space with a curated selection of books, booksellers who feel passionately about their favorites and are eager to suggest them to customers, and live events with nationally recognized authors who know that in the weeks following their events at our store, their books will remain on our displays and they will be enthusiastically recommended to customers by our booksellers. In the 22 years since I moved to Dallas from Washington, D.C., many wonderful things have happened to enhance the city's literary culture. New locally owned and operated bookstores like Interrobang and the Wild Detectives and Deep Vellum Books, public readings and festivals and conferences centered around authors and reading. But all the same, I still want more. I wish that we were experiencing the growth of book coverage in our local media rather than the contraction. I wish that Dallas was on pace with San Antonio in growing a city book festival that attracts over 100 renowned authors. Maybe Oscar can talk to us about that. So I look forward to the panel's thoughts and your ideas and questions as we collaborate together tonight on how to make Dallas unquestionably a literary city. Thank you.
Well, Larry, I think we've hit upon something here.
Yeah. That's right. Looks pretty good to me.
I never thought I'd live to see the day when Dallas residents showed up to an event 15 minutes early. That's pretty cool, especially around books on a Friday night.
It's great.
So welcome to the 5th Annual Dallas Festival. This year we're calling it the Dallas Festival of Books and Ideas, presented by the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. I'm Tom Wong, Assistant Managing Editor at the Dallas Morning News, with my good friend and planning partner, Larry Allums, Director of the Dallas Institute. The festival is made possible by the generosity of our sponsors, CityTrack sponsor, the Sapphire Foundation, advocate sponsors Baylor Scott & White, Lyda Hill Philanthropies, and Dee Dee Rose, and our other sponsors listed in the program and on signage and screens. We'd also like to very much thank the leadership of the Dallas Morning News, President and publisher Grant Moise and editor Mike Wilson, and of the Dallas Institute, board co-chairs Russell Bellamy and David Griffin. Finally, we want to recognize our festival partners, the Dallas Public Library, the Friends of the Dallas Public Library, the Dallas Museum of Art, and also PEN America, whose Director of Membership, Rebecca Stump, has a few remarks for us now. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. Oh, that's a live mic. I brought my theater voice tonight. I'm Rebecca Stump from PEN America. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. Thank you to Lori and Interrobang Books for hosting us in your beautiful store. Thank you to both Tom and Larry for creating this wonderful festival. I'm here tonight representing PEN America, which is an amazing organization. It's a literary and free expression organization that's been around since 1922. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and free expression to defend human rights and First Amendment rights here in the U.S. Lately, we've had a lot of victories. I don't know if you've been following the case of the 2 Myanmar journalists, Walon and Cha So-u. They're Reuters journalists who were imprisoned in Myanmar for over 500 days. 2 weeks ago, they were released. This is a very exciting victory. PEN America has been advocating on their case for the past 2 years. We are thrilled that they, just last week, were able to accept their Pulitzer Prizes in person and with their families in tow. Yes, that is exciting. We're not just about helping journalists abroad who are incarcerated for unreasonable reasons. Here at home, we celebrate campus free speech programs. We have a free press program. We also have the PEN America Literary Awards, which give away over $370,000 to the top tier writers in our industry. Several of our panelists tonight are actually PEN Award winners, so we're thrilled to see them here. You've now seen my face, so if you're interested in learning more about PEN America, please come say hi to me after the event tonight. I'll be here to talk to you about ways to get involved and to support free expression here in Dallas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great hearing from PEN America. So the Dallas Festival has always had a straightforward but challenging goal, and that is to make Dallas a better city for everyone. And the theme for our festival this year is the Open City. It's all about making connections. And once the program committee set the theme, we then form planning groups. They're listed in the program, each of which determine the focus of its city track and suggested keynote speakers and panelists. And this year, we have a different format, which we have been very pleased with. It's been exciting to get out into the city. And rather than presenting the festival on one day in a single venue, we've conducted the festival over an entire week at a different venue each night. And tonight, we're in one of Dallas's true treasures, in Terabang Books. And thank you, Lori, for your warm welcome. Thank you for having us here. It's just so wonderful to be in your space. We come here a lot, and every time it's a treat. So tomorrow, the Dallas Festival will conclude with an all-day celebration of books and writers at the Dallas Public Library and the Dallas Museum of Art. And the details are included in your program. It's going to be an all-day celebration of books.
So let's now begin tonight's program on the literary city, which will invite conversation on what makes a city literary. Is Dallas already a literary city? If not, what will make it one? Please note as we begin, you may submit your questions and comments on the cards provided. Do you guys have, okay, so Josh has cards on the side. And at the conclusion of the program at 8:30, we invite you to remain for a 30-minute talk back when we'll consider further some of the ideas previously presented in a smaller group. Please note also that there will be no book signing tonight due to the length of the program, but pre-signed copies of the speakers and panelists' books are available for purchase.
So we'll turn the program over now to our moderator, Lauren Smart. Lauren is a professor of practice at SMU. She's a journalist and a critic. Her work has appeared in the Dallas Morning News, Arts Plus Culture Texas, CultureMap Dallas, and American Theater Magazine. She holds a master's in arts journalism from Syracuse University and BA degrees in English and journalism from SMU. And so we'll call Lauren to the podium now.
Hi, everyone. I would just really quickly want to thank Tom and Larry and everyone here. I have been moderating a version of this panel on and off for a few of the years of the festival anyway. In 2015, I think it was, I moderated this Literary City panel. And one of the things I love about the Festival of Ideas is that it really is a place where we come into this place to think, to be challenged, to grow, to learn, and they're really not afraid of big ideas, truly. And in 2015, I moderated the panel that had Alma Guillermo Prieto, who's a journalist from Colombia, and she came up with this idea that we would have a mentorship program that would take high school students from all over the city who maybe would be interested in telling the stories of the city, looking at the city from a new perspective, and pair them up with professional writers. And the next year, Tom Wong and Kate Park, who is the director of Friends of the Public Library, they started the program, and I actually have facilitated it and run it for the last few years. It's called Storytellers Without Borders. So what I'm saying to you tonight is that these ideas are not just ideas, they become reality, and it's really, really cool to be a part of a conversation like this. So I hope you'll stick around and become part of the smaller group that really takes the ideas presented here tonight and makes them real. So it's my pleasure to introduce Oscar Cásares. He's the author of most recently Where We Come From and Brownsville, both of which you can purchase here. And he'll also be part of the festival tomorrow during the day, where I think he might sign your books. Brownsville is a collection of stories named an American Library Association Notable Book of 2004, and the novel Amigoland. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he teaches creative writing at the University of Texas at Austin, and I think he has some ideas for us. So Oscar, the floor is yours.
Hello, Dallas. Great. There's a pulse out there. You know, it occurred to me as I was standing there that I'm the outsider here, right? I think everyone on the panel has some connection to Dallas, and I don't, right? And now the question has been posed, is Dallas a literary city, right? It's kind of loaded, you know, it's somewhere on par with do I look fat in this, right? There's really only one answer, right? And so I'll get around to the answer. Bear with me. I should also say that it is, there's a bit of irony in being asked to tackle this question. I am a person who, as a kid, grew up in a house with no books. That always shocks and dismays librarians, and I become the poster child, and they rush me to their class and say there's still hope. There's still hope. There were only 2 books in our house. There was a phone book, which actually doesn't count, but and there was a coffee table book of JFK's first 100 days in office. And this is in Brownsville, Texas, I should say. And so in our very Mexican and very Catholic and very democratic household, this book was almost like a book of worship. You know, we didn't have a Bible. We had the JFK first 100 days in office. What took the place of books were my 2 uncles, my tío Nico and my tío Héctor, who were master storytellers and would come to our house and tell stories for hours and hours. Stories about how the Comanche had kidnapped my great-great-great-grandfather in northern Mexico in the year 1850 and brought him across the river before releasing him, and this was how we arrived in Texas. Stories of how we had lived on one or the other side of the border, and of the time when the Rio Grande had flooded and changed course, and our land was literally both in the U.S. and Mexico. Stories of a neighbor stealing my grandfather's land, and my grandfather then arming his 7 sons and instructing them to shoot the neighbor if he came anywhere near the property. So yes, books were missing from my life, but stories weren't. Literature didn't enter my life until I started writing. By this point, already in my 30s, and I was living in Austin, working at an ad agency. In the summer of 1996, I was working on a handful of stories, and after about 5 months, I walked into my boss's office and I quit my job so I could write full time. I should say, if anyone here has students at UT, I advise my students not to do the same. I didn't have a family, I didn't have a mortgage, I'd paid off all my bills, so I figured it was worth a shot. And if things didn't work out, I could always come back. This was only possible because I had no clue as to what I was doing. No clue as to what I was getting into. I had no idea how difficult it would be to get published, to get an agent, or that I even needed an agent. I didn't know the difference between literary and genre. I didn't know what character development was. I didn't know what plot was. I didn't know how dialogue worked. I should mention that I had been around this all my life, listening to my Theo's stories. But to us, they were just stories. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about form and theory. One thing I learned fairly quickly was that there was a difference between an oral tradition and literary fiction. I understood my life was rich with stories, but at the same time poor when it came to knowing how to write these stories. A couple of years later, I decided to apply to graduate school to follow an MFA in creative writing. Of the programs that accepted me, I chose the Iowa Writers Workshop. Number one, because it was Iowa, and it was the oldest and considered by many the most prestigious of the writing programs. But mainly, I chose it because I wanted to get out of Texas, and I wanted to get away from the border. And more specifically, because I thought being away from the region would help me imagine it more clearly. It would force me to see it in my mind's eye and not simply see it in my backyard. When I made that decision, I didn't realize there would be actually another reason why I should be in Iowa. I didn't know that Iowa City was the right choice for a kid who grew up without books, a guy who had avoided books until he was 32 years old, and then got this crazy idea that he would actually become a writer. It was a perfect choice because Iowa City, as it turned out, is a literary city. I couldn't have told you in 1999 what a literary city was, but I quickly found out that I had swapped Austin, the live music capital of the world, according to Austin, for Iowa City and what could be called the live reading capital of the world. People were talking about books everywhere, in bars, in cafes, on the radio, because many of the readings were actually broadcast live on the local public radio station. There seemed to be 2 or 3 readings a week, sometimes at Prairie Lights Independent Bookstore, just a couple of blocks from campus, or on campus itself at one of the auditoriums. My first reading in Iowa City had been at Prairie Lights with a group of first-year students. There might have been more going on in the city for the 2 straight years that I was there. All I knew was that books and writing, and the writing of books, was the culture. Writers were everywhere. Writers talking about novels, writers arguing about writers, writers drinking, writers falling in love. After living in Austin for over 10 years and then moving to Iowa City, overnight I came to trade Stevie Ray Vaughan for Philip Levine, Willie Nelson for Flannery O'Connor, James McMurtry for Larry McMurtry. Traded going to South by Southwest for attending the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Traded the Kerrville Folk Festival for the AWP Conference. Aside from the poets and fiction writers from the workshop, the University of Iowa also has a well-regarded nonfiction writing program and an international writers program and a summer workshop series, which meant that aside from students in these programs, there was a constant stream of visiting writers teaching in all 3 programs, not to mention the writers who would pass through on their book tours. One day, after I'd been in town for a couple of months, I had to change the oil in my car, and I took it to a mom and pop service station near my apartment. They were short-handed that day, and I had to wait around for one of the mechanics to come around and fill out the service order and take my keys. He was jotting down my name when he stopped suddenly and looked up at me. He said, "Hey, I thought I recognized you. You're that guy that was reading at the bookstore the other night." And it became very clear, if it wasn't already to me, that everyone was into books and into writing and into everyone's business. I was a long way from Brownsville, is what I'm trying to say. I wasn't in that house without books anymore. Whether or not I knew it, I was in a literary city. But what about today? What about Dallas? What about, do I look fat in this outfit or not? Dallas, with its multiple bookstores, including this beautiful one that we're enjoying right now. Dallas, with its Book and Ideas Festival, now in its 5th year. Dallas, with its Mayor's Reading Challenge. Dallas, with its deep pool of talent, some of whom will be sitting right here with me in a minute. Dallas with Deep Vellum. Dallas with the DFW Workshop Series. Dallas with proximity to the University of North Texas, Mayborn School of Journalism. Dallas with Word Space and a venue that's provided a space for arts for the last 25 years. But I think the more important question isn't if Dallas is a literary city, but why Dallas needs to be one. The same as Austin and Tyler and Midland and Amarillo and Houston need to be literary cities. The same as Lafayette, Louisiana, Knoxville, Tennessee, Scottsdale, Arizona, Tulsa, Oklahoma need to be literary cities. The same as San Francisco and Seattle and Boston and Minneapolis and New York and so on need to be literary cities. As we are reminded every day, we live in a polarized world. You're on one team or you're on the resistance to that team. There is no sitting on the sidelines anymore. The media and politics, more specifically, has no room or patience for nuance or subtlety, for finding that middle ground. At some point, the discourse became more about winning and less about understanding and agreeing. As Jim Hightower, a former Texas agricultural commissioner and syndicated columnist, is famous for saying, "There's nothing in the middle of the road but yellow stripes and dead armadillos." But being a literary city is a direct challenge, and perhaps our most aggressive challenge to the idea of having to live in a black and white world. Because while the media and politics thrive on presenting our world as black and white, literature exists in a gray world. You may end up on one or either side of the color spectrum. But the difference is literature has challenged you to make this choice. Literature has the power to take you places. Literature has the ability to open hearts and minds, which has always made it a powerful weapon that has been used to liberate, and because of this, it has also been targeted, at times with censorship, bans, and even book burning. Because to open a book is to open a mind, and to open a mind is to open a possibility that didn't exist before. It is a challenge to the status quo. It is to question what has been accepted as fake or as fact. It is to entertain the possibility that our similarities are more important than our differences. That instead of division, instead of us and them, there can be a space for understanding our differences. I'm not talking about some utopian kumbaya moment. I'm suggesting treating each other with care and dignity and respect, and this only comes when we have some understanding of what makes us more alike than different. Can we see the person of color beyond their skin, or where they were born, or who they worship, or who they choose to love? Can we see them? I mean, really see them in all their humanness and frailty, and all their grace? Can we see them if they come to us from another country, alone and afraid for their families? Can we see someone who grew up in Abilene, or on the west side of San Antonio, or the south side of El Paso, or River Oaks in Houston, or even a kid who grew up in a border town with no books? Books have this power. Books teach us. They show us not only other worlds, but also our capacity to see ourselves in those other worlds. Books bring clarity where there was ignorance. They bring empathy where there was indifference. They show us how much more we can be. Think of how the CIA used Dr. Zhivago to undermine the Soviet regime during the Cold War. Think of what Things Fall Apart taught us about the effects of colonialism on African culture and identity. Think of what 100 Years of Solitude taught us about the history of Latin America. Think of what Beloved taught us about the legacy of slavery. Think of what The Grapes of Wrath taught us about the Great Depression and poverty. Think of what To Kill a Mockingbird taught us about the Deep South and Jim Crow. Think of why 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale have found new audiences since 2017. What I'm saying to you is, rather than asking if Dallas is a literary city and expecting a yes or no answer, the question itself is what's most significant here. To me, to ask such a question is to ask it with an open heart. It is to want more for your community. It is to desire a place to meet, not divide, common ground. Because we can still disagree on the narrative. But the point is, in reading, in fostering a literary city as Dallas is doing now, together we will have traveled the same path. Thank you.
Yeah, you're there. Yeah. Okay, that was wonderful, and it's going to give us a lot to respond to. So I'm going to invite the other panelists up, and I'm going to briefly just say their names, and you have their bios in your program, so we don't spend too much time on that. So Sandria Faye is sitting to Oscar's left. Ben Fountain will be to Sandria's left, or I think we're in a mic order, so sorry, I'm in charge of not very many things, but that's one of the things I'm in charge of. Ben, you're right by Sandria. Ben Fountain is in the middle. Sarah Hepla is to his left, and Jaina Sangra is to Sarah's left. So there's a headline. As a journalist, there's a rule of headlines. I think it's Betteridge's rule of headlines that if the headline asks a question, the answer is usually no, which hopefully is not the case. Dallas Literary City, hopefully the answer to that question isn't no tonight. So I want to start with just any responses that the panelists have to just immediate, impulsive, instinctual responses to Oscar's talk tonight. Sarah, you're looking at me like you have a response.
That was a bluff. No. My response is, it was a great speech. Like, I loved it. It was awesome. And it made me think about storytelling and, and I loved the dodge that you made of whether or not this is a literary city. I mean, an elegant, yeah. Because it is I think the point is that we want to celebrate, like, we want to be a literary city, whether we are or not. The people that are in this room are the ones that would make it that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't actually have a good formulated response to it.
Yeah, Ben.
Well, when Oscar was going through that litany of great books, Beloved and 100 Years of Solitude and To Kill a Mockingbird, I mean, what I was thinking was, literature, and I always get kind of twitchy when the term literature or literary is used, because I'm afraid in mainstream culture that evokes images of people in turtlenecks and ascots. standing around in English department hallways saying things like, "Oh, contraire," and I beg to defer. And so I want to reclaim literature and literary language as language and books that's getting down into the real stuff of life. I mean, the blood and the guts and the work and the sex and the sweat and I mean, really engaging with the stuff of life. But so when Oscar's going through that litany of great books, and they are great books, I'm thinking, well, literature, if it's literature, it's not information, it's an experience. And not every book will be an experience for every person at every time, but if you read a particular book at a certain point in time, say 100 Years of Solitude, or for many of us when we read To Kill a Mockingbird at the age of 14 or 15, it cracks you open. It's an experience, and it really changes your life. And I think, what changes us, our experience, is not information. And when literature is really acting as literature, it's an experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Gina?
I really admired, Oscar, the differences that you found between after you went to Iowa City and you were at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And incidentally, I don't know if you all know, but in 2004, the UNESCO Foundation, they did a sort of organized an impetus to name literary cities of literature, not just in the US, but around the world. And the first city in 2004 that became the city of literature was Edinburgh, Scotland. And, you have like big statues there of Sir Walter Scott and William Drummond, who's a poet. And of course now there's Alexander McCall Smith, and of course J.K. Rowling's is, from Edinburgh. So I started thinking about, what can we do to get Dallas on this? And incidentally, there are 28 cities that the UNESCO has named as cities of literature. In the US, the two cities are Iowa City is one, and Seattle is the other one. Not New York, not Chicago, not San Francisco, although San Francisco, I feel, is a great city for writers. All these other cities are great cities for writers, but I would like to see Dallas, be on that list. And if you look at the other cities that are on that list, there's Milan, there's Baghdad is on that list, Krakow is on that list, so I would really like us to be on that list.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Immediate responses, Andrea?
That was a beautiful presentation. When I moved to Dallas, I moved, and what they said was the art district. And the reason I moved there was because I was in the middle of writing my book. And I came here to work for a major corporation. And I thought that being in the middle, in the art district, would put me in a place where I would see other artists, because I didn't want to lose that, like I didn't want to stop writing in the middle of my book, right? And that was in 2006, I believe, somewhere around there. And so I asked, that I didn't see any artists in the authors in the art district. Dallas is, when I think about Dallas, I think about Dallas being a business town. It's all about business and how much money you make and where you're buying this outfit or that outfit. And I got caught up in that, and I've actually stopped writing, except for I met two writers here. One of them is here, Rosalind Story, but she didn't live in our district, so so I was wrong about that. But so my thing is, I grew up in a family like similar to Oscar. We had the Bible and a half a set of encyclopedias. And so I thought, like, well, if they aren't here, what can I do? If you have to ask the question, then you know the answer. That's what my grandmother would say. And so if it's not here, what can I do? And LitHub now has called me an activist, like an literary activist. And so I became part and sat on the board of WordSpace. And now they've grown, or I've watched them grow tremendously. There weren't any independent bookstores, and now I frequent at least 3 of them that are in Dallas now. So I can say that, and there was no Festival of Ideas, of course, but I can say that we're growing as a literary city. And I would like us to continue to grow and become what, UNESCO has a list of things that you should be to be a literary city. And I would like to see us continue to grow and be that, because in Texas, I thought we did everything bigger and better, especially Dallas.
Which half of the encyclopedias did you have?
We stopped at I. A
Okay,
through I.
first half. 2 quick housekeeping. You should have a place to ask questions that we'll get to at the end of this. We're going to pause about 20 minutes. We'll give you 20 minutes to ask audience questions. And then also I want to encourage the panelists, if you hear, this is a conversation, so if somebody says something that you want to respond to immediately, don't make me, I don't have to call on you or anything like that. I was struck, Oscar, by the idea that you came to the concept of a literary city or reading in general through your interest in writing and storytelling. Yeah. And I wonder if that is maybe the starting point for building a culture of literary people.
The idea of
Coming to reading or literature through the interest or impulse to write or tell stories.
Yeah, for me, as I said, I mean, I didn't know it, but, I had been hearing these stories forever and a day. So essentially, I had been in a workshop since I was about 4 years old. I was just absorbing sort of how my uncles told these stories. But I didn't know how to do it on paper. And so, in part, I started reading because I wanted to figure out what other people were doing. And I wanted to know what their tricks were. How the hell were they doing this? I mean, how did they build this suspense? How did they hook you from the first page and pull you all the way through a story, or even more spectacular, a novel? How was that done? And so to me, it was I was on this journey. I was searching this out. I don't think it's a big mystery that I was on this list. I think a lot of it has to do with that, as I mentioned, that sort of stream of talent that's coursing through there, regardless of whatever you may think of Iowa City. And some people hate it, and I understand. I understand your hate. But because there are so many different voices going through there, people who are permanent faculty, people who are visiting faculty, it just creates this energy. And it sort of feeds on itself in a way that I've never seen anywhere else. We have that to some degree in Austin. I think part of what helps Austin, obviously, is the Texas Book Festival. I mean, it's sort of undeniable that's a huge part of getting Austin closer to being a literary city. And I think also the Harry Ransom archive, which is just a treasure and just has some of the best work of that we know of literature. So.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you all are the stream of talent, or part of the stream, right? So for Ben, I know that you build communities around you of writers. What are some of the strengths, flaws, frustrations you see in Dallas as a potential literary city or currently existing one?
Well, I mean, the money struggle is always there. And for young writers especially, well, for all writers, except for Stephen King What's his name in Florida? James Patterson. He's the only writer I know who has his own plane. But the money struggle for most is as much of a challenge as the writing itself. And when I teach, I tell my students, it's not just this thing off to the side. It's going to dominate your life, and the circumstances of your life are going to be, how do you make enough money to keep body and soul together and still carve out enough time to get your work done? And if you're going to get your work done, that has to be the determining factor of your life. I think, getting writers together, like little not ready for primetime groups, like WordSpace was all those years. Just kind of, old shoe, but they serve a purpose, and people can get together and talk about books and be around book people and get some kind of notion that it's not an indulgence, it's not a trivial thing, and in fact, it's an essential thing, essential to our humanity. And if we're going to be more than economic units, more than creatures who justify their 3 or 4 feet of space by how much money they make or their economic task in life, literature is one of the prime places we're going to look to. I do want to say, yeah, we want this to be a literary city, but there are a lot of people who would not like for this to be a literary city. And it's not a conscious thing, but I would say there are powerful institutions and forces and people in this city who would view a serious examination of the human condition as threats to their privilege and power and wealth. And so I think we have to understand that we among ourselves, except for the few corporate spies who've been sent in here, yes, we're in favor of having a literary city, but if you push too far, you might get disinvited from the Dallas Museum of Art. Which is... And so, let's understand what we're up against. It's not a conspiracy, but I would say it's more a convergence of institutions and interests and privilege.
Yeah. Sandra, where do you turn to for sustenance, or where do you find yourself frustrated in the literary scene here?
It's an uphill battle. I think that if you have to make it a priority. One of my professors told me, I was still working in corporate America and trying to become an author. And he said, until you make it a priority, you're not going to get that book done. And he didn't say quit your job, but I had to put it first on my list. And so I've made it a priority to build a literary city. I host a literary reading series every second Tuesday of the month. And so I continue to try to build that city that I hoped that was already here when I moved here. And just surprised that Dallas being this big of a city. And just developing friends like you, Lauren, and Ben is a huge advocate for us struggling authors. And so, but the biggest thing is just finding support. And Ben mentioned it. The money, like just for authors to come in to the city. The other thing that I find, I was here in this store for Tiari Jones when her book came out last year. She was here in March, and the audience just looked very diverse, more diverse than what it looks tonight. So I know that there are people out there, and that there are people that want to read and want to make it a city. But just finding those people and the money to do that is mostly the thing that I run into.
Lauren, can I speak
Yes, please.
So I grew up in Dallas, and I was embarrassed of living in Dallas because it wasn't a literary city, and I looked to books for stories and guidance, and people weren't writing about Dallas. And I wanted to live in one of the cities that people wrote about, that would tell you that you lived in an important place. So when I was 30, I moved to New York City. I mean, it doesn't get much more important in this country than that. And what I found was that I was a writer living in a city that was basically had more writers per block than any other city in the country. And we were all just trying to tell the same stories that weren't really ours to begin with. I mean, I came up with, every story I came up with in the 6 years I lived in New York, I think they did better on Seinfeld. And meanwhile, I had grown up in Dallas surrounded by stories, but I didn't know they were stories until I moved away. Is there...
I think we're trying to figure that out.
No worries.
I like books better than technology.
I related to a lot of Oscar's speech, but the part about moving away from Brownsville in order to figure out what was interesting about Brownsville and what it looked like. I never knew what was different and interesting about Texas until I lived outside of Texas, and I realized they did it differently. But what I found in New York, I went $50,000 in debt. It's an unaffordable town, and especially unaffordable for writers. And one of the great ironies is that we have these cultural capitals like New York and San Francisco, where writers can't afford to live. And that's a huge opportunity for a city like Dallas. Cities like Dallas, cities like Cleveland, Pittsburgh, these are cities that have the opportunity to be the great next literary cities. Because there are places where people like I can live. I can afford my rent. And I moved back to the city here in Dallas 7 years ago. And, you know, it's sort of it's a marvel to me that it took me 40 years to realize that I had grown up around these stories. I mean, I'm sitting next to somebody that probably did write, probably arguably the great Dallas book, you know? But why aren't there more of them? I don't know. This is like a question I ask myself all the time. But I think that I also just want to say that one of the things that really bummed me out when I came back to town is I would do literary events and there would be like 3 people there, and I was like, God, this sucks. Nobody cares about books. And I'm so moved, like, looking out at all of you tonight, because it means that you got, like, part of me wants to, like, turn the mic over to you guys and be like, what do you want to make this a literary city? Because let's do it. And let's make sure we're doing things that make you guys want to be involved and a part of this and feel good about this place that we live for whatever reason we got here. So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, Jane.
I think what she said is important because it is about you guys, and we need to be working, writing the books that we need to write, and not necessarily always being the advocate for the literary city, not always building the city, but creating the work that you want to read. But more times than not, I find that it's us, the writer, who is doing the work to build the city. And I see, like just the other night, Larry was like, you need to be writing, don't come tonight. And so people have to tell me, like, don't, you know, like, how are you getting your writing done? Because I'm the one that's on the panel, and I see Sarah a lot and Ben a lot. And so we need to have a city where we can create, and we know that you're there when we finish.
Yeah, Gina?
I would also like to say that even though we are writers, I think everybody in the audience, you may be a writer or you may not be a writer, but you have an obligation to be a good literary citizen. And what I mean by that is to, you know, not just frequent the bookstores and the libraries and literary events, but also, you know, take part in book clubs. There's an excellent book club at the Dallas Institute of Humanities. There's a breakfast book club and a lunch book club, which is moderated by Larry Allums, who is sitting here. And there are other book clubs. And I actually have a hopeful story for our city. There is a book club that just started at the Dallas Museum of Art, which is part of the Arts and Letters Live program, and I facilitate that book club. And last September, we took that book club for one of the books for Jasmine Ward's book, Sing Unburied Sing, we took the book club we hosted a book club at the Pan-African Connection bookstore, which is in South Oak Cliff. I had never been there, and frankly, when we pulled into the parking lot, I was a little scared. But I was with with the people from the Dallas Morning News, and if you have never been there to the Pan-African Connection, it is an amazing place. It's a very large space. It used to be an old supermarket, I think, and part of it is a bookstore, part of it is they sell arts and crafts and masks and things like that, and then part of it is an event space that can host, I don't know, 50, 100 people, and that's where we had the book club. And the people from the Dallas Museum who had organized this, we went there on a Saturday afternoon, and people came for the book club, about 30 people, but they hadn't read the book. And I was a little bit worried that, okay, I'm supposed to facilitate this book club and nobody's read the book. But Carolyn had brought copies, paperback copies of the book, which she handed out. And the reason they hadn't read the book is because they couldn't afford to buy the book. And so she gave out free copies of the book, and I was a little worried, and I thought, okay, so I did a quick synopsis of the novel. And boy, they were ready to talk after that. They had things to say about the book. And just from that brief synopsis. And we had a rousing discussion for 1 hour. And this is in South Oak Cliff. The other interesting thing about this place is that, and here we are talking about the literary city, and I think part of it is we have to we cannot ignore these communities that are at the periphery, like South Oak Cliff. At the same time, we cannot ignore places, wealthy neighborhoods in Plano and Frisco, which are part of Dallas, and people from there are reluctant to come here. I have friends who live there, and I say, please come to the Institute, or please come to the Arts and Letters Live program. Oh no, it's too far. We need a passport to go there. That kind of thing. So that mentality we have to get over that. The other great thing that I mentioned when we went to South Oak Cliff is that before the book club was taking place, there was a group of middle school age kids, about 20, 25 of them. And if you can imagine this, a group of middle school age kids, all black, and they were in there studying Mandarin. Okay, and I was wondering, why are they studying Mandarin? And I happened to ask, and I said, why are you studying Mandarin? Oh, we are studying Mandarin because when we are old enough and we go into the workforce, China will have far exceeded us in trade, so we will have to speak Mandarin. So this is the kind of work that is going on, that we need to bring them into what we're doing as well.
I'm struck by this idea that hearing y'all talk, and also thinking about the bigger world that we're living in, this push and pull between social responsibility and also audience awareness. And even hearing just well, what do you guys want? But also we need to make sure we're doing these things that are in neighborhoods that maybe we don't feel comfortable going into. And so and I see that in journalism too, right? The idea of the newspaper being supported by subscribers who live in Plano and North Dallas, and also desperately needing to cover South Dallas, and neighborhoods where we don't go on a regular basis. So I'm wondering if there's any thoughts, ideas, whether it's about the border or just how do we move forward in this world in which you need money to write books, but the literary city needs to speak to people from all backgrounds. This is a really challenging, complicated thing that can't be solved by some branding, the Dallas solution of branding it in a shiny way. I'm just going to do the teacher thing and be silent until one of them talks.
All right. Well, when you do this kind of work, if you write fiction, or if you write, a certain kind of, very substantive nonfiction, I think you've got to go where your head and your heart lead you. And so I think, that's what writers do. And hopefully there are enough writers out there that all the geography, all the terrain, both human and literal, will get covered sooner or later. But I think you have to rely on the writers to follow their heads and their hearts and their instincts, and hopefully we'll get there with that. I mean, with a newspaper, with if you're running a newspaper magazine, that's a whole different animal. But just as a fiction writer, it's follow your heart.
I'll say that one of the first lessons for me was that, and this is partly why I quit my former life in advertising, which was lucrative and it had its perks. But it dawned on me very early that the money wasn't going to solve the problem that I had, and the problem was time. The time, in fact, was the commodity. And then the other lesson that eventually came around, and I'm guessing since no one's mentioned it, I may be the only one that suffers from procrastination. If you call me up to go do this or whatever, and it's, I'll go do that. Send me something I'll do that. It's so much easier to do that than to keep my butt in the chair, or, just do what I need to do, particularly when you're starting something new. And so that I think that's also a struggle, and to sort of be honest with yourself. Am I doing this, one, because, or do I have the time to do this? Have I taken care of myself, and now do I have this additional time that I'm going to put toward this? Because it's you can trick yourself into all kinds of things.
Sandra, you organize a lot of literary events, which means that you're giving your time away to other writers. Can you talk about why you do that, and what impact you hope it's having on the city?
I'm just going to blame it on my parents. And also, like, I remember Toni Morrison said, if you don't see the book that you want to write, write it. And so I carried that into the rest of my life as well. If I don't see the programs that I think that I want to see in the community, then I go ahead and jump in. I do find that sometimes sometimes it takes too much time and not enough support, either with people or with finances. But Lauren does the same thing. She hosts a lot of events. And sometimes the real reason that we can't get certain people is because we don't have the money to bring them in. And I remember Lauren told me once for the event that she hosted, which was a beautiful month-long event, and she was like, why is it that African American women, when I call them, they need financing? And I was like, because many times we're out here on our own, and we don't have someone to finance our careers. And so we're not in the schools. We don't have those jobs at universities or anything like that. So if we're going to come, we at least need to have it paid for. That is very difficult to get here in Dallas. I don't know about other cities. I've only been a published author here in Dallas. But for the programs that I run, that's very difficult to get. When I worked for the corporate America, it was easier for me to build a program. I helped to build a literary festival in South Dallas that grew by leaps and bounds because we had the money to do it. And over the Labor Day weekend, all of the African American Museum and all of those surrounding businesses were packed. And it was also because I worked at that corporation and I made it a priority. After I left the corporation, it's sad. It hurts my feelings to see what that literary festival has turned into. And so, and now I host another organization, And we have our 1 year anniversary coming up, and I paid for one of the authors' airfare. That's all it took was airfare. But I paid for the airfare myself so that I could bring him into Dallas. And hopefully, Sarah, as you said, they won't come in and only have 2 people at the event. So those are the risks that we run into. But when you do the work, though, fortunately, I've only been to one event where there was only a couple of people. But when you do the work, I have a marketing background, so maybe that helps. People will show up. You know, you have to reach out. You have to do the marketing for yourself. I never sit back and wait for someone else to do that marketing for me. I put it out there. I let people know. And whatever it takes, I will put that effort into it to ensure, because when people show up, they really do enjoy the event. But you have to understand that people have busy lives. And just the book is not the first thing on their list of things to do. So you have to put in the work and make it appetizing for them to want to come to your events.
Sarah, you look like you have something to say.
I'm sorry, I gotta change my facial expression.
You always have something to say.
No, I was thinking about how, one of the things that I liked in hearing about Iowa City was this idea that I sort of had this vision of people kind of like walking around and like talking about books and sharing ideas. And I was thinking about how Dallas is this disconnected, disembodied city. I mean, you talked about people not even wanting to come from Plano, but it's like, how do we get people together just talking? And the books are these great connectors. You know, we talked about how divided our world is, right? I mean, this is why book clubs are so huge, especially in female communities. You know, like women love to get together and talk about a book. And I'm not saying men don't. I'm sure men do too. I'm just saying it's a female phenomenon. And if you ran a black light over the city, over where the book clubs are, it would be crazy. The number of book clubs in this city. And it's like, again, I'm just thinking practically, how do we tap into those people? Like, how do we bring them, how do we make a book club? And I know that's what this place does. I mean, that's what Interrobang is doing. That's what Wild Detectives is doing. You know, we're trying to get people to stop by, but this is not a stop by and chat kind of city. And how do we connect to each other when so many forces push us apart? That sounded much more dramatic. How do we connect with each other when so many forces push us apart? But this is the part of the movie where we find connection. But that's my question. That's what I was thinking about.
Is there, I mean, and you bring up a great point, and part of the deal with Iowa City, it's very walkable.
It's walkable.
You know? Yes. They have huge pedestrian ways, and so there's really no reason to have a car unless you live out on a farmhouse or something. Is it possible to have a district, like this is the book district. This is where we're going to have our festivals. This is where we're going to have our bookstore.
We have it. We have that.
So,
where is that?
Downtown.
I mean,
downtown?
I think one of the secrets, I think I've said this at this panel before. Dallas is driven by real estate development,
Yeah.
and until there's a real estate developer who says, "I want to make a book district," which I don't know any real estate developers who would go, "That seems like a profitable idea. Let's do that."
Wait a minute, what the art district's
Ben, go.
Well, I mean, the Dallas Institute is slowly, stealthily, cunningly building a critical mass of infrastructure and real estate on a street that will remain unnamed, so that you can continue your conquest. But it's over there by the quadrangle, and I'm astonished and really like amazed and pleased at the scope of ambition there, and they own 3 beautiful chunks of real estate contiguous on one side of the street, and it could happen there. And that's a very walkable part of the city and a really congenial part of the city. And there's a lot of bars, which...
So don't worry, Larry. Our big idea is that you start a book district.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to?
Well, you know, I was at the event a couple of nights ago, the Welcoming City, right? And I found out that there was actual, and don't jump on me for this, but there's a welcoming department at the city of Dallas. And me just being a literary person, we have all of these cities here listed in the book. That's Science City, the literary city. So there needs to be something that says the literary city. Where's the literary city? If I move to this city and want to know something about literature, where's that department? You know, where's that department that I go to? If I want to find out how can I get funding for my organization, where's that department that I can go to? And I can't count. If I run into Blake McKenzie, who runs writing classes, and I'll ask him, how do I get publicity for Lit Night? And he'll say, well, how do I get publicity for my classes? So we don't know where to go to get information. And I thought that welcoming city, or at the city of Dallas, was such a grand idea. And if we have all of these cities that were represented for the Festival of Ideas, why not have an umbrella for all of these cities so that we can go to one place to find out information? And then we can spread that out throughout the city. And the last thing I'll say, that we can't just have one event in 1 week and not come back to this until the next year. We have to work on this consistently so that when we can talk about, we had that department, the department could give you a list of things that we've accomplished in the year, and this is what we need to do to move forward. But anyway, it was just a grand idea that I thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, that's another thing. The poor library is always the catch-all for all of the ideas. We're like, just get the library to do
Right.
it. So I think that we're walking through the crowd, picking up questions. So if you have any questions for the whole panel before we break out into a smaller group and let those of you go, Gina.
I just had an idea just listening to all of you talk, and that is, if we do this, we will instantly put Dallas on the literary map. And that is, I used to live in Cleveland, Ohio, before my husband and I moved here 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And in Cleveland, they have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so...
I see where you're going with this.
And we could have, you know, a statue of Ben in the Literary Hall of Fame.
You could do it.
Well, I mean, we might bring Robert E. Lee back before we do that, which I would not be in favor of, but, I mean, I think we all started thinking a literary hall of fame, you know, a national literary hall of fame. Boy, that would be a political animal to, you know, ride, but it's actually, that'd be a great premise for a short story, the Literary Hall of Fame. Anyway, think big.
Yeah, we'll put you up, Ben. Statues of all of the
Please.
people up here.
Ben would be the only statue that we...
Or a literary walk of fame like they have in Los Angeles, right? Don't they have the stars on the that you walk
right.
on? Yeah.
I think
Right,
we're
leading out
back
to
to the question of
Central
money
Expressway.
here. Any final sort of maybe some more positive thoughts, or some, as you look at the city that you have, the four of you have chosen to live in, what keeps you here? You know.
Well, it's it may not be the foremost literary city in the country, in the world. It's good in this sense. If you're a writer, a certain kind of writer who's trying to figure some things out, it gives you a lot to push against. And I mean, I gave this talk in Seattle once, and so the first question I got, you know, after my talk was, how can you live in Dallas? And And, you know, I said, well, I felt like if I lived in Seattle, I might fall asleep because, you know, I mean, you know, it's just too easy and everybody agrees with you and you're never challenged. And whereas in Dallas, I feel like I'm challenged all the time.
I think that's so true, and you know, when I think about other cities that cater to writers, I mean, they are really echo chambers in a lot of ways. And a lot of the discussions we've had, at least in the journalism world, over the last 3 or 4 years, is how is it that these parts of the country are not talking to each other? You know, and there were these large pockets of the journalism world that were saying, "Wow, I didn't know this was going on in the rest of the country." Well, I mean, here in Dallas, we can't help but know the other side. Whatever political side we're on, we know the other side. We're bumping up against each other all the time. We're a split city. And I think that's really important, actually. I think it's really, when you think about that part of what we are supposed to do as writers is understand our world and understand the other, you know, that's where we are. Like, understanding Dallas has helped me understand the rest of the world. I think you had a line once. I don't know if you stand behind it, but like, Dallas is the most American city. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, no one's proved you wrong yet, so I like it. I mean, there's a lot about Dallas that is true about America, and I think it's actually a really, like, the opportunity here for you as a writer is immense. The affordability, but also just like the stories that are here, so.
And I would say I may complain about what's not here, but I've seen this city grow by as far as literary, leaps and bounds since I've been here. In July, D Magazine will be, in this issue, will have, this is the 3rd year they've done that, a list of fiction in their magazine, which will come out in July. That wasn't going on when I first came here. Thank you, Ben. But anyway, I've seen it grow. There's so many things going on. And all we have to do, I think, is just make it a priority. And especially our business community, who Ben is afraid of. We just have to make...
I'm not afraid of it.
Afraid of what they may do. But we need the business community to come in. We need to merge that together, the business community and the literary community, so that we can grow together. Because everything I know in my life, all the places that I visited, came from a book.
Great. Okay, so I'm moving on to audience questions, and I moderated a panel a couple weeks ago and forgot to say this. I didn't write any of these. These all came from you, so I'm reading them from. So just don't assign any of the questions to me. Thank you. Okay, so Oscar, I'm going to have you answer this first because it's not Dallas specific. How do you respond when someone tells you they only read works they can identify with? Second question, do you think that kills the spirit of literature?
Well, I get a crack at that every semester, practically. And my job, I enjoy teaching. I mean, it affords me the time to write, you know. I won't tell you how much I teach because those tax-paying folks out there will be really annoyed with me, how little I'm actually in the classroom. But I know that within the last 2 years, I have felt that my job, the election redefined my job. I have every semester at least 20 to 25 young minds before me 2 to 3 times a week. And they will read whatever I put in front of them. And I put a lot in front of them. And I put a lot of diverse stuff. I put stuff that I'm almost, I don't want to put anything in front of them that they haven't read that isn't going to challenge them and make them a little uneasy. I just finished teaching a course on how race is used in literature. And they were all of this, practically the whole reading list was new to them. But what surprised me was there was this hunger to learn how to talk about this, to talk about these very weighty topics that, you know, a good many of them, unless they came from tiny little towns or rural areas, had grown up in this very multicultural world, and yet lacked the skill to actually talk about that. And so to have this space to challenge them, to make them uneasy, to see when a writer is maybe taking an easy way out with some, you know, trope or stereotype or what have you, and to talk about why, you know, the effect of that is wonderful. So yes, I encounter that, but I don't encounter it, I think, the same way as the general public, just because I'm calling the shots, you know. Read that.
Other
You know.
responses to that question?
I think it's a choice. Most of my family members didn't even read my book.
Yeah, I've been there. No, they keep. You know, I haven't gotten around to it. That's the. And I will. I just haven't gotten around to it. I mean to.
Yeah.
Like on some level, I relate to the idea that I only read books that I relate to. Well, I just said I relate. Okay, you know what I mean. I mean, especially, like, I remember being a stubborn kid that didn't want to read because it felt like eating your vegetables. So, like, I wanted to read a book about a young girl. Like Judy Blume meant a lot to me. I feel like that's a doorway for a lot of people, is books that they relate to. But then the more you read, the more you realize that it's a door to relating to things that are not you, right? So it feels like that's just the first step of a larger process, which is the reading, the education process of reading, which is learning more about yourself and then more about the world. That's my thought.
Yeah, it seems also that question can be flipped on its head too, which is it's a question as much about representation in literature as it is about what you choose to read, right? Like, I think so many of us are so excited when we see a version of ourselves just a couple steps over.
Yeah. Yeah, and then at the same time, because I was female, I grew up reading books about boys, and it was no problem for me to make that leap. But then when I put out a book, you know, I would hear about my life. It's like guys are like, oh, that's for women, because it's a woman's story. But it's not a woman's story. I mean, it's a story about a woman, but all literature is people stories, right? Yeah, so I mean, I feel very lucky that I grew up able to make that empathic jump. It's just effortless for me. And I think maybe for other people it's not as much.
Yeah. Gina, Ben, responses to that?
I think that, I mean, it's one thing is the time, right? I mean, we have a limited amount of time, and there's so many books to read, right? Just look at this. As far as, you know, reading and being familiar with what we know, I mean, I've come across this at the Dallas Institute, where we do a program called Classics at Co-Regard, which Larry and I do. And we've, you know, done a number of classic books, 3 years, you know, every semester we do 2. And one of the books that we did was an Icelandic writer called Halldór Laxness. And you know, I was a little worried about, you know, who was going to come. And it wasn't as well attended as some of the others because people don't know about Halldór Laxness. And he actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 1950s. And it's a wonderful book. And, you know, but yet, you know, people don't want to come because they've never heard of him. And my answer to that is, you should come because you haven't heard of him, right? And you have to come and understand what this is all about. So it's a matter of also curation, which is so wonderful, that to have a bookstore like Interabang where the works are curated, so you know that when you come in here, you know, you will, if you're looking for a mystery book, you know, you will find a good mystery book.
And we have
So-
Halldór Laxness.
Yes.
So this next question is take a look around and see the age group. How can we get the younger generations involved in being part of creating this literary evolution that is slowly growing? I'd like to make a small edit or just a shift in this question, which is how do we make this a cross-generational conversation? I think this question gets asked a lot on panels that I moderate, and every time I just sort of want to say I want to talk to old people as much as I want to talk to other young people about books. So how can we move towards a more cross-generational?
Put it on YouTube.
Problem solved. Next question.
No, I think it's just whoever is creating the event, you have to do the work. And I can say this wholeheartedly because coming up on my 1-year anniversary, I keep mentioning this, but I'm proud of it. But not only is the audience diverse, age, race, everything, disabilities, all of that, but so is the stage. And I think looking at the stage here is part of that as well. And it just, you just can't put the word out to the same people all the time and expect to get something different. You have to reach out. You have to do the work. It's work. Whatever you want to change, whenever you want to change something, whoever's put in organizing and everything, you have to do the work. That's just bottom line. It's no way around it.
Schools. I think the way literature and reading are taught in the United States these days kills it for a lot of people, and they never come back, or you never get a chance at them. And I substitute taught at a community college one evening for a friend, and I looked at the anthology that was like, she had to teach this anthology, and it was awful. And so I spent the whole class like writing on the board like really good books that you'll like. And the fact that you don't like the stuff in here, you're right. It's crap. And I don't know what happened in the next class, but you know, the corporatization, the you know, just the mind-numbing standardization of you know, aspect of mass education in this country, like it just kills it right out of the gate for a lot of people.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Other responses to that question?
Yeah, and you know, it reminds me a little bit of basically the first day of my fiction workshops, and the first thing I tell this group of young writers is that, you know, you've probably shared your work with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your mom, or you know, and they probably liked it. They probably told you something really encouraging about it, because that's their job. But the truth of the matter is, nobody wants to read what you've written. Nobody in this, look around, look, you see everybody in this room, nobody wants to read what you've written. They're like a little bit curious, but they don't really want to read what you've written. You've got to make them want to read. You cannot assume that, you know, because you've written it, they're gonna read it and love it. You know, that's not happening anymore. And let's just be honest about it. For me, and I think some of this has to do with when literature entered my life. My threshold for the boring crap, to use Ben's technical term, is very low. I don't want to be bored. I don't want to spend an hour talking about something. You know, there's a difference between something that's important and something that's good. I mean, and I will acknowledge that this had its moment, and it does mark a time, and this is, you know, post World War II or whatever the, you know. I'm teaching these classes to, I teach writing classes, but what I really teach are reading classes. In the sense that I'm teaching them to develop their own aesthetic, teaching them ultimately by reading what I find are engaging texts and challenging and not always easy to figure out, but compelling in a way that they can't put down, to eventually be able to read their own work with that same eye, right? I can't make them into great writers. I can help them find their voice and find what might be necessary to put out into the world. But they ultimately have to see that in themselves.
Okay, I have my own interpretation of what this question is trying to ask, but I'm just going to ask it, and you guys can respond to it however you want. Where does the practice of journalism, with its current stresses and politicalization, fit into Dallas's efforts to become literary? Not readers on cameras of news, but the writers.
Boy, I fear for them. I mean, and I fear for all of us. I think that's a real crisis. And when Mike Marshall and Chris Wagner, were laid off at the Dallas Morning News earlier this year, that was a big blow to whatever aspirations Dallas might have to being a literary city, a thinking city, and I know there are a lot of good people at the Morning News who are fighting the good fight and trying to figure out a way to make it an economically viable concern. But, I don't have the answer. But I think it's a serious threat to the life of the city. The fact that we may lose, God forbid, or see in a very diminished form our daily newspaper.
Other responses to that question?
Well, I mean, I think that question is somewhat related to the last one, which is that, why do we see the demographic we see here is because a lot of you probably heard about this in the Dallas Morning News. The Dallas Morning News has an older readership because the older readership is willing to pay for the content. How do we get a younger readership to pay for the content? Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know how we get the genie back in that bottle. I will tell you that after that happened, I did something I hadn't done, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I hadn't done it before, but I'm going to go ahead and admit it here, which is that I subscribed to the Dallas Morning News after that. I had been infected by the virus that told me that everything should be free. And it was when things started getting taken away from me that I started realizing the faulty, I think we've all been infected with that disease. And, if we're going to have to invest in the culture and the society that we want. So that's one thing that I did. I got nothing on how it succeeds, but just do your part. That's one part.
I think that a lot of people don't know is that the Dallas Morning News, they have a wonderful auditorium downtown where their offices are. So we need to have more events there so that we can...
They do have a nice auditorium.
Yes, they do. So
I didn't know that. Other responses to that question?
Fancy office.
And then I think we're going to have to wind down with this portion of the evening after that. So maybe, is there any hope?
There's always hope.
Well, I thought that the Dallas Morning News and the Institute did a very good job of advertising on social media as well. I saw it on all of my platforms, and when I did see it, I saw, Sarah, you retweeted it as well. Ben hadn't come on board with us yet to the to the social media platform, but we do have to follow the times and support that and support where younger people are. That's where they are.
Sandra, they're not on Facebook anymore. Young people are not. They're way ahead of all of us.
Yeah,
We're all getting on Facebook. They're already on to something else.
They are leading the way.
Any other last minute thoughts on that? So I think, well, the format of the rest of the night is that we're going to let those of you go on with your evenings who are ready to eat or drink and be merry. We are going to have a smaller, continued version of this conversation up here, but we'll give you a few minutes to sort of resettle, buy a book, get out of here. I think maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then if you want to stick around to talk a little bit more to our panelists, come up to the front. Oscar doesn't have time. Nobody has time to sign books. I'm sorry about that, but thank you guys so much.